Without further ado, I'd just like to welcome, and it's my honor and privilege to welcome Admiral Showers and to hear him speak about what happened 70 years ago and the impact that it's had. So without further ado, Admiral Showers.
Thank you, Jim. And a special thanks to Admiral Rogers for all that he described and all the kind words he said. He practically told you the story of Midway, and I'm going to tell you a few more things that will clarify some of the things about Midway that people have, over time, some of the revisionists and storytellers have misspoken on, and we need to correct. I want to leave that message with you today. 70 years is a long time, and I really, in 1942, had no thought that I would still be here to talk about what we did in 1942, nor did it matter as much at that time. We were just doing our job that we were asked to do. And under Commander Rochford's leadership, his motto was, we can accomplish anything as long as we don't worry who gets the credit. He felt that he had failed his commander in 1941, in December 1941, by not providing Admiral Kimmel notice or warning that the Japanese were going to attack Pearl Harbor. There was no way he could have done that. We now know that. But he didn't know that at the time. And he did not provide warning to Admiral Kimmel. So he dedicated himself and his unit and his ability to never let that happen again. And what he was able to do at the time of Midway, only 6 months later, that is a perfect demonstration of his dedication to providing operational intelligence to the commander in time for him to take advantage of it, to plan his defenses, and to carry out successful operations. And that's the story of the Battle of Midway. Now, there are, as I said, myths and revisionists, and I'd like to clarify 3 or 4 of them. First of all, there's been lots of discussion and lots of accusations that the U.S. Navy was reading, mind you, reading the texts of Japanese messages from JN-25, the Japanese Navy's operational code, before Pearl Harbor. And that if we had been on our toes, we would have been able to warn Admiral Kimmel of what was going to happen and enable him to defend against it. And that the Navy had that information and covered up the fact that we knew that. Covered up the fact that President Roosevelt knew it. This is not true. Not true at all. The reading of JN-25 commenced probably at least a couple years before we were able actually to read it. There's 2 aspects to breaking the code. First of all, your cryptographers, who are not linguists, but they are mainly mathematicians, have to discover the structure of a code system, a code or cipher system, how it works to do what it is supposed to do. And that is that's a scientific art that very few people have. But fortunately, here at Pearl Harbor, we had Lieutenant Commander Tommy Dyer and Lieutenant Commander Hamright, who turned out to be a couple of the Navy's very finest and most capable cryptographers. They were the ones who worked out the procedures for how you would break JN-25. But to break JN-25 simply takes it out of the code system and puts it into Japanese plain language. Then you need the linguists to read those messages. The nature of JN-25 was that it was a manual code book, a manual cipher system which had a dictionary of 50,000 code groups. And in order to read the messages, we had to recover the meaning of each one of those code groups. And the main story of our work was recovering code group meanings, one by painful one. And it took time, and it took talent, and it took research, and it took a lot of effort on the part of a lot of people. And that was Rochford's team. It was also going on in Washington, at the headquarters in Washington, off 20G. It was going on in the Philippines originally at Station Cast, which was evacuated successfully from the Philippines just before they fell, and was reorganized down in Melbourne, Australia, as Frumel. And at the same time, the British at Singapore and in London and in Australia were working on JN-25, and even the Dutch in Indonesia were working on JN-25. There was a lot of effort going on, but nobody was reading the texts of those messages in English prior to the beginning of the war. Take that for a fact, because it is true. We did understand the code system. Cryptologists had broken the code, but we could not recover the code groups that fast. Before the war, we probably had recovered something on the order of 8% of the code groups. Try writing a thesis on the basis of 8% of the English dictionary. I doubt that you could do it. So Hypo also was not working on JN-25 prior to the war. This was not part of their assignment. They were assigned to work on the Japanese Navy Flag Officers Code, which was supposed to be a high-level, very useful code. If we could find out what discussions were going on among Japanese flag officers, we thought we could learn a lot of intelligence. We never succeeded in breaking that code. It never produced any intelligence despite all the effort that went into it prior to December 1941. In December 1941, when operations began by the Japanese and the amount of traffic that was being put on the air and interceptable in JN-25, boomerang enlarged tremendously in volume. And that became immediately evident that this is what was going to carry the messages that were going to fight the war. And that's when Hypo was retasked by Washington to work on JN-25 instead of the Flag Officers Code that they had been working on. So commencing in the very early part of 1942, still with the help of the people in Washington, with the help of the people in Melbourne, Australia, relocated from the Philippines, and with still help from the Australians and the British, we did make more rapid progress because of the volume of traffic that was being put on the air. More rapid progress in the ability to recover the meaning of code groups and to read the texts, read in English the text of the Japanese messages. The Dutch were believed to have been ahead of everybody else in this effort, but that's only a story now that we have to take on faith, because all of the Dutch records on their intelligence work in Indonesia were destroyed when the Japanese invaded Indonesia, and there's absolutely no records of the Dutch efforts that still exist. The ability to begin to read texts, as I said, began early in 1941, but it was a slow process. I arrived here in February 1942, and at that time we were not reading messages. We were perhaps reading fragments of messages, but it was hard to put together a message from which you could derive intelligence. But that changed rapidly. By March and April of 1942, we were beginning to read messages that had enough context to make sense and to produce intelligence. And that's how in April of 1942, when Rochefort was able to notify Admiral Nimitz of the upcoming Japanese operation against Fort Moresby, which resulted in the Battle of the Coral Sea. And that was the first test that cryptology and intelligence as a source of information was a valid source and was a dependable source. A lot of people in the Navy thought that cryptology was a mystique that we had invented and couldn't really prove was valid, but it was proved in the Battle of the Coral Sea. And of course that was the first two-sided battle of World War II in the Pacific, and it was the first time carrier airplanes fought a battle without the ships of the opposing forces coming into sight of each other. It was a unique battle, but it was a very significant battle. And as was said, it was the battle, the outcome of the battle was a draw, but it was a victory for the United States because the Japanese had to retreat. They never carried out their plan to occupy Fort Moresby, and try as they might have in other means during the war, they never did reach Fort Moresby. It remained an Australian naval base throughout the war.